grade courses are not something that should be done in the classroom. I'm always uncomfortable teaching grade courses in a classroom. We should be outside somewhere in some nice valley and a fire burning. And I had a real dilemma when I was given all of this knowledge, is how much is practical to tell people. The only thing that allowed me to move from being somebody who had had an extraordinary experience and was really quite mad in terms of society, to be able to come down from that place and to go into the mundane plane of telling people that you got information from a voice and stuff like that. It's very bizarre. The only way that could be justified for me was because of the basic logic of human design, and that the logic itself was something that could withstand scrutiny, and it certainly could withstand me being scrutinized. And so, I've spent most of my working career in human design dealing with the practical application of this knowledge as it involves individual human beings. My only real concern is for the potential liberation of any single individual, to really understand what it means to be your own authority, and to understand that the moment that you become your authority, you are awake, and you get to live the unique experience of why we're here in form. But I was given an enormous amount of information, and so much of that information had to do with things that were not verifiable. Human design, the magic of human design is that I recognized from the moment that I was given the knowledge that at some point, I didn't know whether it would be in my lifetime, it turned out to be in my lifetime, that at some point somebody would be able to prove the validity of this, because it was just simply logical. And you could prove the validity because you could take the samples and you could do the analysis and you could do all of that, what was ultimately done with human design. But it's another thing to talk about past cycles, and it's another thing to talk about future cycles. I was never caught up with, I'm not a fan of the New Age to begin with, so I was never caught up with all this business about past lives and incarnations and all of that. That was never something that was interesting to me. Nor was the past in that sense interesting to me, other than the fact that it gave a nice foundation and background for the present. But the reality was that when I took a look at human beings and they were interested in who they were in their past life, I was more interested in who they are in their present life, because that was where the real problem was. It had nothing to do with their past life. They left that body a long time ago. So I was very cautious for years about other information that couldn't be substantiated. I've given many great courses covering a whole spectrum of knowledge. I gave many of them here in Austria, here in Vienna, and in Ilse's mill. And for me, it's interesting because this is the end of a process. And I kind of like it. And what I like about it is that though what I'm going to be able to share with you over the next days isn't something that you're going to be able to verify in the moment, I get to live in an unusual time as a prophet. It's a very interesting moment. That is, there's a camera running. They're going to know whether I'm full of shit or not. They're really going to be able to verify that, because basically all of this is timed and it has markers and it's going to be there. And there are those who are going to be able to look at these things and say, yes, that's accurate. The most phenomenal thing for me about the nature of the information that I was given is how rapidly science catches up to each of the aspects of the revelation as I move along. There's an enormous amount of things that are available through this knowledge in terms of being able to see where we're going and the movements that we're going in, that will be very important for science to understand in terms of, we're going through a major change. It's one of my joys in design is that I can participate in an evolution that otherwise my little lifetime could never grasp. We've got these short little moments in which we're here in the vehicle and it goes by incredibly fast. I mean, it's incredibly fast, and it just whoosh, it's gone. And there's no way that you can see the larger movie. Oh yeah, you can look back and you can say, you know, there was this movement from this to this to this to this to this. But it's like history books. What I like is being able to live in a time of mutation and get to recognize and see the mutation everywhere. I mean, literally to be able to see it, because it's all at work. You know, I'm going to talk later, I don't know when I'll get there, but I'll get there, about solar plex mutation. And in the early 90s, I began to talk a lot about autism, and autism in its relationship to the 19th gate and the 49th gate, and this channel of synthesis that runs between the root center and the emotional system. And I began to talk about autism because it was clear to me, in terms of the information, it was obvious to me that this mutation that we're moving towards, that is this solar plex mutation that we're moving towards, that a mutation is not something that takes place in a moment. It doesn't. It crystallizes in a moment. Oh, you know, there's this magical place where it goes, choof, and it's there, and it's recognizable. But there's a whole movement that leads up to it. It's one event after the other. It's why they've always talked about the joke of how to recreate life on another planet, if there could be another planet and they would have life just like us. And the odds are so incredible, it's hard to imagine. I mean, it's trillions upon 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 trillions to one. That anything remotely like that can happen, because it's a process. And I knew because the solar plex mutation was coming, that we were going to have an explosion of two things: autism, prostate cancer. It was just there. And you know, I've watched year after year after year since I began to talk about that. And you see this incredible explosion taking place in both of these. I mean, I just read an article 2 weeks ago in the International Herald Tribune on the fact that autism has risen to levels that nobody understands why. It goes far beyond the fact that more people are reporting it. It goes, you know, far beyond any kind of factor that they can work in. California, for example, has a level of autism that's just outrageous, and it keeps on expanding at an enormous rate. The reality is that the autistic child born 30 years from now wouldn't be autistic. That the male with prostate disease now will not have prostate disease, with the very same phenomena at work within them, will not have that disease 30 years from now. It's not even 30 years from now, it's less at this point. It's 25 years from now, 26 years from now. In other words, we are going through a mutation, and one of the things that is so clear to me, I know people in my life who are suffering from or who have died from prostate cancer. I have people in my life, and I have dealt with many people who have autistic children. We're talking about tragedies, after all, at the personal level. We're talking about tragedies that are not simply the tragedy of the victim itself, but those human beings that are around them and with them, the life that the parents of an autistic child have to go through in terms of dealing with that, all of these things. And of course, when you look at these things at a personal level, you know, there's this wonderful cry that says, you know, why us, why me, why? And it's an extraordinary thing that when you see it in the evolutionary sense, that they were built in to go through this as victims. I mean, after all, we can't get from here to there without going through those intermediary stages, and there are always those that are simply, they have to pay the price for the mutation to take place at a later point. And it isn't even of any value now. That's what's so extraordinary. I mean, it brings negative value. We know that. It brings disease. You know, it brings all these problems. It's just an interesting thing when you're participating in an evolutionary process. You're awake and you're aware and you watch what's going on. You begin to see the program doesn't care about us. The genes that we have within us don't care about us. I have to recognize that. It's the oldest thing that came out of me was, when I started this process, was that human beings have to learn to love themselves. Because the program doesn't love you. Your genes do not love you. They do not. All you're left with is the illusion in the middle. Oh yes, we are very much illusions in the middle. And it's how we deal with our illusion that's the whole point. That's why I spent all these years trying to simplify the mechanics of freeing yourself from the not-self so that you can live the illusion. I love the illusion. This is life. It's all a mirror game. It's all this Maya. It's delicious and warm and sweet and cold here anyway. I was sitting in the sun yesterday. It was 20 degrees and I was feeling really nice. And then I had to get on this damn airplane and come here to Siberia. All in the name of I don't know what. One of the great courses I taught over the years was something called the 64 Steps. And it is about our evolutionary process. And it's a way of understanding the magic, one of the many, many magical things about the magic of the 64. It's one of the ironies, or one of the jokes, if you will, of looking at the way in which the hexagrams are structured and numbered, that number 1 and number 2, rather than being beside each other, are opposite each other. So what's the rhyme or reason of going from 1 to 64? After all, why are they called 1 to 64? This is one of the magical things that's inherent in the structure of the I Ching. Those 64 sequences, those 64 steps, they really are an evolutionary process. When I received the revelation in 1987, the first thing that I was told was that we were still in the 54th step. We have global cycles. We're in a global cycle now that started in 1615. It's going to end in 2027. And in 2027, we go into the 55th step. So we change the sequence, Think about what that really means. Every single one of us is one of the things about understanding what you see in a human design chart. The easiest thing to be able to see is sameness. It's the easiest thing to see is sameness. So if we take a genetic analysis of everybody in the room, it's going to be really difficult to find anything but sameness. Those 64 gates, they represent the genetic matrix. We all have that genetic matrix. All of us. What you get to see in a human design chart is you get to see imprinting. And that imprinting is differentiation. Now, this is something very important to understand. You're not looking at somebody's genetic code when you're looking at their chart. What you're looking at is how they're differentiated from someone else. That's why it's the source, the real source of self-love. Because you do get to see your difference. And anybody who has gone into any deep level in design, and I mean below the line, to color, to tone, to base, to the tens of thousands of variations that exist in every configuration, this is not astrology, then you get to see that you get down to very, very, very fine points of differentiation. And it's differentiation that makes everything important. Now look, we have cells in our body. They all carry the same DNA. All of them. Doesn't matter what job they do. If you go into that cell and you go into its core, if you go into that nucleus, what you're going to find is the DNA for the whole being. You could actually take that and clone the whole thing. And yet within the context of that cell, it only does a specific job. It's a blood cell, it's a muscle cell, it's this or that. And the reason it does that is that it has an imprint. It has a focus point that it only concentrates on. When you're looking at your design, you're seeing your focus points. Doesn't mean you don't have any of that other stuff. There isn't a line in the Rei Vi Ching that I can read that you can't identify with. You know, you can identify with any line. Anybody can, because it is us. But the PowerPoints, those imprinting points, oh yes, that's what you resonate to, because that's really your differentiation. Now, the global cycles don't work differently. They don't. That is, what's happening is that you're getting an imprinting at another level. It's another level. You're getting an imprinting that resonates. So that imprinting, we've got a 54 step. This is the 54th gate. It's resonating through everyone. It's a whole cycle of movement. The other thing is that 54. If you look at it in terms of design, you know that the other side of that, that is the channel that it's involved with, is the 32nd gate. And you got to imagine that if we're in the 54th cycle now and it's not going to end till 2027, that you got to go back a few years to get to the 32nd one. In other words, the whole thing that started this process started long ago. What's the 3254? It's a channel of transformation. Only now, only since 1781, we have been ready for transformation, and it's going to end in 2027 in February. Basta. And after that, you won't be able to transform anything. Nothing. And this is the only time that the potential for transformation is there. From 1781, it was the advent of the nine-centered being. From 1781 to 2027. Now look at what has happened on this planet in that short period of time. You talk about transformation. There has never, ever been anything like it. It's incredible. No matter where you look, in terms of the development of human consciousness and intelligence, in terms of our capacity to be able to manipulate the environment, which is what we were designed for, the transformation is incredible. And it's coming to an end. You know, this is the time to be transformed. And slowly but surely, as we move year by year to 2027, this door is closing. You know, the 54th gate is very magical. When I went through the process of having the Rei Vi Ching written, because it's the only way I can really describe that, I wrote the Rei Vi Ching in 1989. I didn't know the Ching other than I had seen the Wilhelm translation translated into English, which was whatever that was worth. Had no real background, and I was living in a small house outside of Frankfurt in Germany. And funny about that, it was it still used coal for heating. And I had a little typewriter, and I was sitting up in this little loft with a little coal stove. And just around this time of the year, because it was written during the Scorpio month, every morning I would go up there, and I would actually go downstairs first and get coal from the coal bin, and I would take the coal upstairs and start the fire. And then I would sit down at the typewriter, And I would draw out the chop, the hexagram, and I would draw the hexagram out on a piece of paper in front of me, and I would just look at it, and then I would write the hexagram and the lines. And I would do that every morning until I had done all 64 of them. And it took me about 25 days. What was interesting about that, considering my affection for black, is that the coal dust on my hands, and all of those original documents, and the first Rave I Ching, if you open it up, every page is covered with black fingerprints. They're all over this thing. Anyway, it's a great course, eh? I mean, I will go where I go, The 54th gate, which is where I got started. If you would take somebody who had been deeply, deeply educated in the original I Ching, I mean the real I Ching, and they were to read the Rave I Ching, and I've had this experience with real I Ching scholars over the years, particularly in the early years where they were trying to see whether this was, bogus or whatever the case may be. And they would go through all of that, and they would see the relationships. Obviously, the language is different and so forth and so on, but the formula is the same. Anybody who really understands the formula can see that all of those, they relate to each other. Except for one thing, 54th gate, fourth line. Because the original fourth line of the 54 has nothing to do with what it says in the Rave I Ching. The Rave I Ching, this is a deeply, deeply mystical line that's called enlightenment, endarkenment, blah, 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 blah. It's one of the things to understand about the whole thing about the 54th gate is that the 54th gate is here to be noticed for its potential. People think of the 54 as a gate of ambition in the sense of the way we try to define negatively ambition in people. They're ambitious, as if that's a dirty word. But in fact, the 54 is not like that. I mean, it really isn't. That's not its nature. Its nature is that it is waiting for that opportunity. It's always waiting for an opportunity. And it's waiting for an opportunity to be recognized for its capacity. It's a joke of the 54. If you turn it around, it's the 45. That's the king and the empress. The 54 is the marrying maiden. Which again is a very misleading name because it has nothing to do with marrying and has nothing to do with being a maiden. It has everything to do with the original meaning. The moon is not yet full. That line in the original I Ching was about trying to marry off your daughters. The old I Ching was very sexist. It was full of all kinds of stuff. But it's one of the things to recognize is that there, in terms of that 54th gate, that really what it was about was somebody being able to see, their moon is not full yet. In other words, wait. The maiden is going to blossom into a beautiful woman, is going to blossom into a jewel. And this is the whole thing about the 54. The 54 is waiting for somebody to see that it's a diamond in the rough. It's waiting for somebody to see that, here it is. You can do it. This is our time. We are all diamonds in the rough. And the nature of the program is that it's opened up a window for us. There's a window. It's closing. Right? There's a window that's open, and it's this window of transformation, and you can see how much impact that's had. The world in the last 50 years, the revival of, 19th century mysticism, the return of, the master guru trip, all of that stuff, the enormous impact that had on a whole post-war generation, because this is the transformation time. In 1961, we went into the first line theme. Now, one of the things to understand about the way in which cycles work is that they work according to the precession of the equinox. In other words, they're going backwards. So when you're going through global cycles, you're going backwards. We're right now, the main point is we're in the 37-1. I'll show you all this in a while. And we're moving backwards. We're going to go into the 55-6. That's going to take place in 2027. But right now, since 1961, we've been in a first-line theme. We'll stay in this first-line theme until 2027. That's why you have me now, because I'm nothing but Mr. First Line. I mean, I didn't even think I was alive before 1961. because it had nothing to do with me. And in 1961, my whole life changed. 13 years old, 1961, all of a sudden my whole life changed. Because the global theme went from being second line to being first line. I've got 10 first lines. I've got a first line in my profile. I, Mr. Investigate, get down to the foundation and make sure that it's solid. And if it isn't solid, call it what it is. And here I am in a first line time. And you have to see how important that is, because the first line theme is education. First line theme is finding things out. Since 1961, we have answered questions that are the most incredible questions. Right now, somewhere out there in the world, there's 2 human clones coming. Hey, they're coming. You know, we're living in a time in which we really are fulfilling what is our destiny. I know it annoys a lot of people. But then again, I like annoying people. I'm a heretic. We're here to be the God we always wanted. I mean, it's true. You know, God created us in his or her own image. Now, come on, give me a break. We can do that job. I don't know about God having done that job. We can do that job. We can recreate life in our own image. Give me a Petri dish. Give me some sperm. Give me a fertile egg. I'll build you a baby. I'll grow it in a cow for you. They're doing that, by the way. That is, they're growing other life forms inside of a cow by using stem cells. Now, I know that all that stuff isn't necessarily pleasing to everybody. However, the point is that we are living in a time where we're here to get all of the answers we need, because the door's closing. The door's closing. We only have 25 years to find out what gravity is. They still don't know what the fuck gravity is. You imagine? I have no idea. They're still trying to deal with Newton and his apple. And until we find out the answer to that question, we're not going to understand the most important question of all. See, when the voice first told me the mythology, and talked about the child, you know, this biverse, as I call it, the universe, the totality, that this is an unborn entity. I mean, it's alive. It's alive. And to really understand that we are part of this, you know, vast living organism. Now, one of the things about the nature of that child is that that child at some point, has to emerge into the world that created it, which has nothing to do with us, by the way. And in order for that to take place, we have to be able to see that. We have to be able to see that at some kind of scientific level. And the way in which the physicists deal with that, because there are metaphysicians, is that they have a question. And the question is, what's going to happen to this universe? There's 3 possibilities. One possibility is it's going to get to a certain point in which it collapses in on itself. The scenario is that time runs backwards. You know, you rise out of the grave, you go slamming back into the womb, all the way back to the beginning, and it's over. Or maybe it bounces back, who the hell knows. But anyway, that's their idea. You know, you go up there and it compresses and it comes flying back. The other one is it's inflationary. It never stops expanding. It keeps on expanding and expanding and expanding, and everything keeps moving further and further and further and further and further away from each other, and then you really have a cold, slowly dying, dead, empty place. And then there's the lunatics like me who say there's something called steady state. And steady state is a moment of balance. It's a moment in which the basic forces of attraction and the forces of expansion come to a place of balance. Now, until they understand the nature of gravity, they can't answer that question. And they're never going to understand the nature of gravity until the scientists discover the magnetic monopole. By the way, any scientist who's going to watch this film, it's here. It's not out there. Looking for it here. You'll find them in the sternum. They can be found. All you have to do is be smart enough to figure out an experiment that'll do that, and you'll find them. And at the moment that we find a magnetic monopole, think about the magic of a magnetic monopole. Think about the magic of it. It holds you together in the illusion of your separateness. It holds you together in that illusion. That illusion includes your mass. Think about that. A magnetic monopole can hold you together in this illusion, but let's say that my magnetic monopole, for some bizarre reason, was simply going to change its frequency, and all of a sudden my mass is equal to 2 stars, and I suck all of you into me immediately. Instant black hole. Choom, you're gone. Matter of fact, I take the planet, I take the solar system, I take the sun, I take the whole thing instantly. A little frequency change. They don't know how that works. You see, they assume that gravity is related to mass. That's still Newton in the apple. But the mass is determined by something. And until they understand the determination of the mass, they're never going to understand how much the damn baby weighs. This is what we want to know. How much does it weigh? When is it going to be born? Can we have baby pictures? Yeah. In doing a last grade course, I dug out, instead of making new transparencies, I dug out all these old transparencies. When I first started to talk about or introduced human design, I would talk about the many disciplines that it came from, the many disciplines that were synthesized into design, and I talked about Western and Eastern astrology. Those of you that work with design obviously know the application of Western astrology in terms of planetary positions and the calculations themselves. But the Eastern astrology is rarely grasped on what its place is within the context of design. And this has to do with the precession of the equinox. And of course the equinox has been moving, and it's one of these things that it's a very important configuration. We've got a lot of people who think that it's the Aquarian age. They should really hold on, because they're not going to experience it in this lifetime anyway, and hopefully they'll incarnate when there is an Aquarian age, but it hasn't happened yet. The precession of the equinox has been moving backwards. So if you start with 33 AD, the equinox was in the 25th gate, in the 6th line. So for example, what you can see is that slowly but surely it's been moving. So we went from an Aryan age into a Piscean age, that is the equinox moving all the way through Pisces. And the moment that it actually enters into Aquarius, and that's the Aquarian age, is going to enter into that in 2439. So just over 300 years from now, we're actually going to enter into the Aquarian age and enter into the clinging fire, the 6th line, the 30th gate. You can see that the gates are listed here. And by the way, they're just samplings so that you can see this movement. But I want you to grasp that where we are right now is here. You can see that our cycle began in 1615. That is, in 1615, the equinox went into the 37th gate, into the 6th line. And you can see in 1961, it entered into the 1st line. And so throughout that period, and all the way until we get to 2027, which isn't in this graph, we have been moving slowly backwards, in that sense, through the structure. That means that we're moving from left angle configurations to right angle configurations, rather than the other way around. And that's something else to understand. We start with the propaganda and then lead to the research, rather than the way in which we live out the normal cycle, which is that the research comes first and the propaganda comes later. In other words, the program makes sure that we get the propaganda first, and then, the research impetus afterwards, but the propaganda comes first. So here's this movement, and you can see that this 1961 is something that is important for us as a marker. these are the dates of the round. So, my name, Uruhu, this is a title. And it's supposedly the title of the closer of the round. Here's our round. It starts in 16,101 BC, and it ends in 3,263. And in 3,263, this movie is over. And I'll describe all of that as we move through this process. But that's the whole thing. So the world will come to an end, but not in your lifetime. 1,000 years, a lot of things go down in 1,000 years in our context. So there's a lot of process to go. But understand something. Transformation is going to end in 2027. It's going to end. This is it. This is the place where we have to find out. This is the place where we have to know. That's why there's so many human beings who want to find out. Right now in the world we have about 75 million professional scientists. This is our time to find out. We're desperately trying to grasp everything now. Nobody understands why. It's just this incredible power and impetus. But the reality is that the door is closing on us. Now you can see that the round itself is broken up into epochs, and they go through various structures and so forth and so on. I don't want to get into too detailed business with that because that's not my purpose in this. I just want to show you where we're at. So you go there and here, and then finally you get to here. That is the sixth epoch, which is where we are. And you can see that it started in 379. And this is the epoch that ends at the end of the round. So this is the last structure. So you're already in, let's put it in the end frame of what the round is. We're in the closing of the round. And you can see that where we are now started in 1615. And you can see the configuration at that point was the cross that was formed by the equinox position, the 37, the 40, the 9, and the 16. I'll talk about this in a moment. That's where we are, so that right now the sun is in 37, the equinox is in 37.1 right now in our process. And you can see here's the changeover in 2027, and you can see that the themes are going to change. We're going to go into the 55-59, and the 55 being the gate in which the actual mutation is going to take place within the solar plex center. We're going to look at that mutation, and you can see that we have a complete change in the thematics. And of course, this leads to the closing, and you can see that when I say that this is the end in terms of transformation, recognize that after this whole process, this is the final place where the transformation is supposed to take place. This is the time where it's supposed to happen. And all of us are, are participants in that. We are in fact, in a time in which more human beings have more access to more knowledge and more information and so forth and so on, all of the things that are part of the technological explosion, the information explosion. But, it's very important to grasp that that door is going to close. Let me give you a taste of that. Formed by the equinox position, the 37, the 40, the 9, and the 16. I'll talk about this in a moment. That's where we are, so that right now the sun is in 37, the equinox is in 37.1 right now in our process. And you can see here's the changeover in 2027, and you can see that the themes are going to change. We're going to go into the 55-59, and the 55 being the gate in which the actual mutation is going to take place within the solar plex center. We're going to look at that mutation, and you can see that we have a complete change in the thematics. And of course, this leads to the closing, and you can see that when I say that this is the end in terms of transformation, recognize that after this whole process, this is the final place where the transformation is supposed to take place. This is the time where it's supposed to happen. And all of us are, are participants in that. We are in fact, in a time in which more human beings have more access to more knowledge and more information and so forth and so on, all of the things that are part of the technological explosion, the information explosion. But, it's very important to grasp that that door is going to close. Let me give you a taste of that. In 2027, the equinox is going to shift, and we're going to move from a first line theme to a sixth line theme. All of you who live to that point, if you have a sixth line in your profile, you will finally be in your time. You will finally be in your time. And all of us, I hope I don't get there, all of us who have a first line theme will feel totally useless. It will not be our world. It really won't. And when that equinox shifts, it's going to move into the 55-6. And the 55-6 is the cross, a left angle cross of the spirit. And here's the sixth line. Acquisition obsession. That though it's the line of selfishness. Acquisition obsession that though alienating is still indirectly beneficial material to others, but the possibility of finding the spirit through materialism. Now we're going to enter into a material age totally unlike anything we understand now. In other words, we're going to enter into an age of form without substance, survival materialism, not knowledge. Not knowledge. Knowledge is not going to be interesting. It's not. We're heading into a time in which there's going to be many different layers that are going to be coming together at the same time and impacting upon each other. Those of you over the years, you know I've talked about this often, that we're going to have, in the middle of this century, we're going to have an enormous crash in population. We're already beginning to see that in the context of advanced societies. We already know that most advanced societies on the planet are not reproducing at a level that's sufficient enough to replace themselves. The birth rate of Spaniards is 1.2. The birth rate of the average European is 1.7. In other words, we're already not producing enough, for whatever the reasons, not producing enough to replenish our societies. The third world, the fourth world, whatever, the reality is that the combination of the destruction of the ozone layer and the advent of very complex diseases like AIDS and many other factors, including vast sterility that's at work on this planet, that we're going to come to a point where we have real population collapse, and it's going to come faster than most people think. At the same time, we have the advent of what 2027 is really going to bring. It's going to bring our demise, shall I say. I don't know if I'm really phrasing that right. This word rave has nothing to do with anybody in this room. The rave isn't born yet. We're human. We're Homo sapien. And Homo sapiens are basically killer monkeys. So we're a vast collection of killer monkeys with smart, manipulative brains. But we're not raves. The advent of the nine-centered being is that we are as much a victim as the autistic and prostate victims. Because you see, we're a victim of the transformation of the vehicle, and yet we're not designed for it. I don't mean to disappoint anybody. Why do you think it's so damn hard for you to wake up? The nine-centered vehicle is a vehicle that belongs to the children that are going to be born with the solar plex mutation. It's their vehicle. It's perfect for them. For us, it's a trial. It's much more complex. It's much more demanding. And of course, in our process as humans, what we're simply trying to do is we're trying to find some place inside of us where we can accept our aloneness. We're human. Raves will never be alone. I'll explain why. But they will never be alone. They will never have to deal with aloneness. They will never know aloneness intellectually. They will never know aloneness physically. They will never know aloneness in any way that one can imagine, because they're an evolutionary progression. We, on the other hand, are the quintessential example of very lonely passengers in very isolated vehicles. We are. It is our nature to be alone. No matter how far you go in your consciousness, I've been awake a long time, I'm still very much alone in here in this box. I mean, it doesn't matter how much love I have in my life, it doesn't matter how well or how clear I am in my bonds with the other and blah, 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 and so forth and so on. It doesn't matter that I can taste every aura that's put into my body and I can recognize what it does and where it is. It doesn't mean that they're in me as me. They don't sit in the back seat of my vehicle with me. We don't share the passenger seat together. We never will, we never can. You and I can never do that. The best we can do is be passengers who bump into each other. You know, we try to put a foot in the door or some other appendage of our bodies. However, you know, that is the best that we can do. And so the resolution for us, and it's one of the dilemmas, because of course what happens is that most people in the, you know, in this time of all of this pressure on people becoming awake and figuring out things and so forth and so on, that there is this tendency, you know, to be able to find that with others, you know, this group phenomena, so that you have people in temples and churches and mosques and whatever the case may be. But the reality is that it's only us and only within us and only for us. This is our role. We are not going to participate in the next evolutionary process. When you leave these vehicles, yeah, sure, you're going to come back. At least the vast majority of you are going to come back, and you're going to come back and you'll probably get a ride in one of those new models. However, there are going to be human beings right till the end of the round. In other words, we're going to have a phenomena which we've had before in our evolutionary development, when Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon lived side by side for about 150,000 years, some people say even longer, that we're going to go through a phenomenon, at least for a short period of time, 1,000 years or more, in which we're actually going to have two dominant species on the planet. We're going to see what that movie looks like as we move through all of that. But for us, for what it is to be human, to recognize that the only way that we complete our process is that we awaken to the beauty of what it is to be different. Because in the end, we're really the last experiment in this kind of level of differentiation. You know, the whole structure of Earth as a platform for life is built on diversity. Everybody knows that. We have over 1,000 species that disappear every day. Did you know that? 1,000 species a day? Keep counting. That's a lot. Right? But you know, we're the diversity king. I mean, this is our magic. You can't find what you need unless you have enough selection. You know, it's like now. You know, we got 6 billion of us on the planet. We've got a chance that we're going to have 1 or 2 smart people. You know, we got a chance. And that we have somebody that can look this way and somebody that can look that way, and we really get to a level of clarity, awareness, recognition, blah, 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 all of that. But all of that is based on the gene pool. You know, you keep on expanding the gene pool because you need certain things. We need those millions and millions and millions and millions of scientists. You know, cranking away at, this is how this works, this is how this works, this is how this works, this is how this works. Do you know that you could spend the rest of your life, 24 hours a day, just reading about all the things that we've figured out now, and that you wouldn't even get to 0.5% of it? I mean, it's like, it goes on and on and on. But it's our end game. It's our end game. Figure it out, close the door. Figure it out, close the door. You know, it's like Crick saying, look, they're going to find a gene for free will. Of course they will. We'll find a gene for everything. You know, we're getting to the point where we close the door, so we have to make sure that we know what we need to know. What we need to know, what we need to know is that you can really sit in this vehicle and get a life for free. Yeah. I mean, a life, not a torture, not a pain, not a drag, but a life. You know, you finally get to the point where you can liberate yourself. I mean, the smarter you get, the more you realize you've got no choice. Otherwise, you stay dumb all your life. And the more you realize that there's no choice, the more you realize how futile it is to speculate on choices. How futile it is to be concerned with the nature of the world. You know, people are always bitching to me about the nature of the world. And I'm always saying, the world's okay. You're fucked up. The world's fine. Thank you very much. Mother Earth wipe you out in a moment if it doesn't like you. We're just grease on the surface. And people are worried about Mother Earth. They should worry about themselves, or at least do something about themselves. It's us. This is our thing. You know, I go out the door a really good killer monkey. I like that. I like that. You know, you go out, oh wait, this is my package. I didn't ask for it. I didn't do anything to make it what it is. And I discovered in this life that if I sit inside of this package and do absolutely nothing at all, it operates all on its own. You know, it's like when you're on an acid trip and you're driving. I don't know if any of you know that experience, but however, one of the things you discover about that is as long as you don't think, you can drive. But the moment you try to think, you're going to hit a tree. I learned that very quickly. Don't think, the body's going along, everything's fine, I'm in space. If you think, it's over. These vehicles, they have their way. Leave them alone. Let them do what they do. You know, it's nice, I'm going to be able to tell you about this and that, blah, 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 and all the other things, but after all, the only thing that matters is that each and every one of you have a chance to complete your own process. You know, there isn't anything else that matters. And it is simple, as I always say. It is just strategy. It is just time. You know, slowly but surely, you know, you get to that point where you release yourself from that burden. And you get to see the movie. And the movie is, well, it's interesting. Everybody's got a different movie. I mean, that's the magic. You know, and if you have your own authority, because after all, that's liberation. If you have your own authority, you can be surrendered. If you don't have your own authority, you'll never be surrendered. Nobody has a right ever to be your authority. Nobody ever has a right to be your authority. If God wants to be your authority, tell him to go to hell. You know, you're here to be your own authority, nobody else, ever. And the moment that you are truly your own authority, and that's not an intellectual concept, that simply has to do where authority is within you in terms of design. And at the moment that you're honoring that authority, you're awake because you're different. I mean, that's the whole point. It would be so nice to see everybody being different because they are themselves. You know, that's the magic for us, isn't anything else. That's where we're supposed to get to. Most people don't get that. You know, they think that we're supposed to have some kind of holy awakening. We're supposed to get to a point where we're different. Because that's what we were designed to show, that consciousness can operate in a vast diversity. And that the application of that consciousness in the vast diversity leads to a whole that is really incredible. So much greater than the sum of its parts. You know, only when we have this vast diversity do we really get to see the potential. We don't see the potential of humanity today. We don't have that. You know, we have everybody regimented into socially, culturally, religiously, you know, all trying to be the same. How boring that is. We're not the same. We're not. None of us. We're just not. And yet everything about the world that we live in says you must be like. Same suit, same uniform, same this, same that, blah, blah, blah. Everybody think like this. Everybody be like this. You know, the fascism of the not self, because that's what it is. You know, the not self hides behind sameness. Yeah, I know I'm fucked up, but so is Louis. And so is Mary. We're all fucked up together. That's life.